Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Pakistanomy. My name is Shahab Siddiqi, and I work at Tabadlab, the company that helps produce Pakistanomy with Uzair Younus. And if you're not watching this and actually listening to this on your podcast, you might be really worried if you're hearing my voice instead of Uzair's. So don't worry, Uzair is here with us. Hey, Uzair.
Hi, how are you, Sam?
I'm good. I'm good. And the reason why we have me on the podcast and Uzair here with me is that a lot of people have kind of written in or reached out and have said that Uzair uh, interviews a lot of people and has these conversations on the economy, but we don't really hear much about what Uzair thinks and what Uzair's opinion is. So we thought that it would be a good opportunity for us to speak to Uzair, get his opinion, especially with the budget coming out, especially with the economic survey coming out, and so those are the start of the conversation and the context of me being here in this conversation, and let's see where it goes. Was there another year, another budget, another economic survey, but this year has been, you know, the year didn't start, wasn't, we never expected the numbers to be amazing, but then with COVID hitting, with a lot of disruption happening, what do you have what did you think of the economic survey of Pakistan that came out a day before the budget?
Thanks, Shahab. And it's interesting being on the other side, being the one interviewed and being asked the question. So it's a good change of pace. I think the economic survey that came out really reflects the dire crisis that the economy is in, right? So the GDP growth number came in at negative 0.38%. Really, a negative growth rate in Pakistan's economy has not occurred for decades. So it is a real shocker. The impact of coronavirus obviously is partially baked into it. So perhaps when the revised figures come out, which they revised for the previous year, downwards from 3.3% to 1.9%, one may expect a similar downward revision to come in the months ahead. But really what you see is a full-blown crisis where agriculture has grown by about 2.7%, but everything else declined, including large-scale industry and the services sector. And at that same time, Pakistan had a high inflationary environment. So inflation overall was 11.2%. For me, the more worrying figure there was that food inflation was 15.9%. And within that, if you look at perishable foods, 34.7%. I want to get away from all these numbers and basically summarize that what happened in this economy was that you had negative growth, which means job losses, and high inflation, which means a decline in the purchasing power of people. So not only were people losing income and losing their jobs, their purchasing power was also going down, and it was going down it was impacting more poorer people or lower middle class people more than anyone else, because they spend a large chunk of their income on food, and food was more expensive by 16%. And if you look at perishable food items, by about 35%. So really a very tough year for average citizens. And at that same time, the government borrowed more. So debt went up during the last year. According to the budget document that came out, the government borrowed from the banks much more than what it anticipated, by about 400 more percent, which is really surprising and shocking. And we can get into why that was the case. But really heading into coronavirus and heading into this budget, the economy was really in dire straits.
So there was a pre-corona situation which was not ideal by any stretch. So we've already had our economic issues. We knew that inflation was going up. We knew that the government was struggling to get the economy going. I mean, politics aside, whatever interventions were being tried, the government wasn't getting the kind of response that it would need to kind of lift things up and meet the goals that it set at the start of the financial year. So that was already at COVID. Now what we have is a situation with the COVID happening, everything, I mean, it's not even a Pakistan phenomena, it's a global phenomena. In fact, the global trade going down, all those things impact us because, our trade goes down, things like that. But two things that you mentioned very, very specifically that are of the most interest is that for a country like Pakistan, which is like a growing country, a developing country, people who are in the lowest strata of society and the lowest economic slabs, they're the ones who are losing the jobs. and they're the ones who are now going to be moving further away from what they like things that they need. The essential items are moving away from their affordability, and their affordability is going down. So the did this all happen in like 3 months? Is my analysis correct, or like my knee-jerk reaction is okay, things were bad but they're not that bad, and then 3 months or 3.5 4 months of COVID, and then everything went to the crap, I guess.
I mean, I think the economy was struggling for months on end. There was no doubt about it. And growth was negative, for example, in large scale manufacturing, even before coronavirus came, right? So there is the impact of the IMF program, or if you were being partisan about it and looking at what the PTI was saying, the failed policies of the past were coming home to roost, partially true, partially we can debate about it. But the economy was significantly weak heading into the coronavirus. And so the way I describe it is that, what we're going through right now in Pakistan is perhaps the most serious socioeconomic crisis since independence. We haven't seen anything like this before. And many economies, in decades, in at least a century, have not suffered a recession like this. I live in the United States, similar situation here. We haven't seen unemployment figures like this since the Great Depression. But in the Pakistani context, COVID was basically a body blow at the time when the economy needed it the least. So it was already weak. So if you imagine boxing, it was like a 1-2 punch. The first punch was already what was going on, and COVID was the knockout punch that came in, and we're not even close to recovering from that right now.
So before we move on to the budget, before we move on from the to the budget and the year ahead, just wanted to have a couple of more questions about the year that's been. There have been a couple of developments. Has it all been doom and gloom in the COVID situation? I mean, terribly in terms of like lives lost, all the other problems in Pakistan, globally, and the way the world has changed. There's no justifications. I'm sure nobody is going to look for silver linings out of this terrible situation. But some of the economic developments that we saw was oil prices getting slashed for a country that imports close to $1.3 billion worth of oil products every month, and is a substantial is a substantial player in our trade deficit conversation. Something that the government this particular government points to quite regularly. How much better, or let me just say, how much worse would things have been had the oil prices not been slashed, or how much value have we been able to gain out of it? So that's the first question. I think you should answer that before we move on.
Yeah, so I mean, look, oil price decline, not even a decline, essentially a collapse, was a blessing in disguise for the economy. It reduced inflationary pressures. It gave the government room to sort of make up for the sales tax or the other tax revenues that were being lost because of the impact of coronavirus, because the petroleum levy went up, and they've budgeted for an increase in the petroleum levy in the coming year as well. That allowed the government to cushion part of the losses that it had. The other side of the doom and gloom, I would say, like one thing that we should appreciate, and some people did, off the bat, the government was really good in terms of rolling out the SARS program and expanding it. The 3-month utility bill deferment that was rolled out, and some initial measures that were taken to stem the impact of the lockdown were, I think, really good. And in fact, there was a period of time where, when the Pakistan rolled out its initial stimulus, followed by India, followed by Bangladesh, I remember talking to folks and saying that, when you look at the region as a whole, and I try to compare the region, Pakistan's economy with its peer economies a lot in my analysis, was that at that point in time, the initial stimulus by the PTI was in fact probably the most effective and the most well thought out stimulus in the region, particularly because it expanded SARS significantly and rolled out cash transfer payments to people who needed it because of the lockdown. Since then, they've sort of lost the plot in my view. But I think those two things, the oil price decline and the initial stimulus provided, particularly by focusing on SARS, was something that we should appreciate in terms of helping the economy during this crisis.
So this is, I think SaaS is a very good way to talk about the year ahead and the budget that's just been announced. So social protection, we were all expecting that social protection was going to be front and center in terms of what the government's going to be announcing in allocations. We were expecting the health budget to be shored up a bit more, and we saw that, there's more allocation for health. Um, but I mean, also it's also important to make this distinction right now, is that the federal budget is not the budget for the whole country, especially vis-a-vis health, because health is a provincial subject. So the provincial budgets are going to be announced soon, and most of the money that's going to be spent in the country on health and on public health, and maybe even connected ministries and industries that are going to be part of the response to COVID are going to be announced at the provincial level. So the federal budget. So that distinction is important, I think. Before
Can I quickly stop you right there? I think the other, I agree with you that distinction is very important, but it is also for people to draw the distinction that while the health budget and other budgets like education are provincial subjects, the provinces draw their resources from the federal divisible pool.
Mm-hmm.
So the performance of the federation in tax collection and how it budgets and what projections it's giving impacts not only the budgets that the provinces devise, but how they disperse funds in the coming months. Because if the divisible pool is less, then they also are constrained for resources.
Absolutely. And we can have that is absolutely true, because the provinces are limited revenue collection capabilities. So they basically rely on the federal government to give them the money that they're going to be then spending on all these things which are provincial subjects. However, this distinction, like you said, is important, because it's important to say the prioritization for what gets what resources happens at the provincial level, and was not going to be dictated by we've seen this in the past, ever since the 18th Amendments come out, that priorities at the federation level are not always the same at the provincial level. They've changed. So that's the distinction I wanted to make. And also in terms of the allocation, one of the conversations that I've been seeing on Twitter is comparisons in absolute number between the health allocation and, say, the military spending, right? The big comparison to all comparisons. We're talking about education. We talk about education federal allocation versus the military allocation. So before we move on to the year ahead, do you want to have a shot at explaining some of that?
Yeah, I think, look, like the allocations people miss is you got to sum up the health spending across the provinces and the federal budget to compare it to the military one. It still is smaller. But I think, like, for example, anyone who's listening and who has a view that perhaps Pakistan should be spending less on guns and more on butter or education or other areas such as higher education, needs to then also ask the question, what has happened to these budgets in the last few years? And if Nadia Naviwala, for example, did a study on comparing the fact that in the last few years, when the study came out a couple of years ago, I think, that the budgets have actually gone up, but outcomes haven't improved. So at some point, we also have to talk about the fact that it is just not about a money allocation problem in places like education and healthcare. It's a value for money question that we should ask. But having said that, yes, Pakistan is, economically speaking, a security state. If you add up the amount of money that's spent on the Rangers, the military, PSDP projects for the military, civil armed forces, it comes to about roughly 1.8 trillion rupees, which is an astonishing sum of money. That conversation has to happen at the parliamentary level and at the political media level. But having said that, we also should be mindful of the fact that the provinces have put in more resources into health and education, but the outcomes have not improved. And there's a question that should be asked about value for money there as well.
So that's an interesting distinction, and I think that there are a couple of aspects to this that we can touch on later in terms of value for money, in terms of development spending versus current spending, and we can have a conversation on this right now. You can have a separate conversation on this, but I think that distinction needs to be made in terms of understanding allocation as a whole is one thing. How much of within those allocations go into new projects, into development, and how much of that money goes into basically maintaining the status quo plus 10% plus inflation adjustment, right? So a lot of those allocation adjustments are there. तनख्वाहें हैं, आपकी दीवारें ठीक करनी है, मेंटेनेंस है, नए स्कूल नए अस्पताल बनाने के पैसे जो हैं वो बहुत छोड़े होते हैं, और जो करंट खर्च करने वाले पैसे होते हैं, we're going to be spending on salaries, we're going to be spending on maintenance of schools and utility bills and all those things, and maybe even the new building for the ministry. Those things get spent on, and that's the money that keeps going up. So the thing is, so like I mentioned, SAS is a good way to segue into the year ahead. Social protection. Do you think what's the plan? Because it's going to be front and center. We're talking about maybe expecting another lockdown. We're already talking about a shrinking economy. The poorest of the poor, the most vulnerable, are going to need another cash transfer. Do we have something like that, in the pipeline?
See, that was for me, that was the most disappointing part of the budget. I mean, you look at the entire discourse that's happened in Pakistan. वजीर आजम साहब कहते हैं कि उनको गरीबों की बहुत फिक्र है लॉकडाउन के लिए. I'll take him at his word, even though I have some disagreements with the argument he's making. But let's say he is truly worried about the poor in this country, and he showed that, as I said earlier, with the initial stimulus plan by widening SR. So in the last year, Benazir Income Support Program, which is also really interesting. If you look at the budget documents, the government keeps using SRs, but the line item in the budget is for BIS, Benazir Income Support Program. That's a different argument about semantics.
पुराने खाते में से उन्होंने नंबर खाली डाले. The registers are old.
Yeah, the registers haven't been updated. But
Yeah.
SAS, which is BISP in the budget documents, got 30% more than what it was budgeted to get last year, right? So it was about 234 billion was revised for the SAS program versus 180 billion that was initially budgeted. Now, the Prime Minister and his team continue to argue that we're worried about the poor, and COVID has impacted the poor a lot, as I showed with the inflationary statistics just in general. The allocation or the budget for SAS is 200 billion rupees. That's a 15% cut compared to what was given to the program in the concluding fiscal year. So if you're making the argument that COVID is impacting the poor and we must protect the poor and make sure that they have enough to survive on, then why is there a 15% nominal cut in the SAS program compared to what was dispersed last year? Especially when every economist from Hafiz Pasha Saab to even Hafiz Sheikh Saab in his interviews is saying that COVID's impact is still ongoing, and it's hard to predict when this will stop. But as the cases keep peaking, it will have an economic fallout. Why has that been cut, right? And so the prioritization in terms of how the numbers were calculated and budgeted for is a bit off compared to the rhetoric that has been deployed in this instance for the Benazir Income or SAS program.
So this is an interesting question then, because, okay, so ever since like time immemorial, and I don't even know, and you can guide on this, if this is a Pakistan problem or if like most economies, large economies in the world or developing economies like us operate this way. But since as far as back as I know, Pakistan always announces a budget based on a number of revenue, which basically Pakistan always assumes it's going to have X amount of money. And then based on that, it announces a budget. I don't think that Pakistan has ever met that X amount of money in terms of revenue collection, in terms of raising money internally or externally. So basically budget cuts happen. So we end up spending less overall than we already planned. And then, like you mentioned, with education and with health, then there's within that, their low efficiency things are spent on more than high efficiency growth spending, right? So we've already touched on that briefly. Now, in a year like this, revenue targets are like up in the air, right? So essentially, we're already talking about a shrinking economy. We've already been talking about how the government's ability to, kind of collect taxes kind of is low. Whatever we've been borrowing money from the banks like crazy. We've been doing that for the past few years, but how much of that are we going to be able to continue to do during this year? So the point I'm getting to is, in a COVID year, in a COVID budget, how confident do you think that the government can be in terms of what is the revenue, what is the income number that it's going to be able to achieve to spend even the 200 billion on SOS that it says it'll be able to do or hopes to do.
Yeah, I mean, look, the thing I maintain and some other people do as well is Pakistan does not have finance ministers. Pakistan has accounting ministers whose job it is to somehow create the illusion of balance or move the numbers around so that they somehow look sane to the eye. But then if you peel it or dive deep into it, you realize that they're just trying to hoodwink you into believing the numbers. So I don't take these numbers seriously because there is a reason for it. So before going into the budget, I'll sort of tell you what happened last year, right? So last year, the government missed its internal resources target, not tax target, internal resources. There's a difference. So the tax target was missed bigger, but internal resources, money from SBP profits, privatization, other non-tax revenue bucket items that they have, they missed it by about 16%, 15.4% to be precise. What happens as a result of that is that your development programs also start getting slashed. So PSDP spending was 20% below the budget as a result of the fact that you were missing or not raising the revenues you were. When you start missing or not raising the resources, you borrow more. So the state or the country borrowed 400% more than what it anticipated from the banks. Now that has an overall crowding out effect because all of a sudden banks have, let's say, 100 rupees, and the government in a high interest rate environment comes and tells them, well, I want 99 rupees of that money because I'm short on revenue. The banks will lend to it because the government is the safest institution to lend to. The rates are high, so here you go. That crowds out private sector investment. So the private sector then does not invest, or A, because of high interest rates, but B, because banks are also not willing to lend to you. So all of a sudden you get into this cycle of low growth, tax revenues being met, the development spending, which is the government's way of stimulating growth, is also being cut. And so you keep borrowing. That's what happened. Now, in this coming year, they're budgeting 2% or thereabouts GDP growth, which Hafiz Sheikh Saab on his own, if you watch his interviews, is saying that that's an optimistic projection. In that 2% growth environment, where inflation is about 6% or so is what they're anticipating, they're projecting a 27% increase in FPR tax revenues. Now, they missed it by 30% last year. So how are you going to have a 25%, 27% growth in tax revenues in a 2% growth environment with 6% inflation? Is beyond me. The numbers, it's just an unrealistic target. In fact, the highest, and I've argued this in some of my analysis before, is that you look at the post-Musharraf era, all governments have had about a compound rate of 16% or so in tax revenue growth. So they're just projecting something that's not happened in the last decade and a half. And so I just don't see how these targets will be met.
So, sorry, just to cut you. During a pandemic.
During a pandemic.
Like a fiscal crisis.
During a pandemic, a fiscal crisis, a period where they're not introducing new taxes by their own rhetoric. So I just don't understand where the excess revenues are going to come from. And that in and of itself was the Achilles heel of the last budget. And it is the Achilles heel of this budget, because the moment you start slipping away from your targets, everything else will be cut. And in this environment, you cannot have cuts to spending or government spending because you're in a pandemic, and you should be spending more, in fact, and stimulating the economy rather than cutting spending. But I think they've been short on creative thinking on how to do that and how to stimulate the economy. And that's my biggest fear, is that as the months and weeks go by coming out of this budget and spending revenue targets are missed and the government spends less, you will continue going into this deeper crisis where the economy just does not have enough momentum to generate growth.
So I think the important thing that you mentioned here, the thing that I take out, I mean, it's absolutely baffling, right? So like I said, government always aims to spend more money than it actually has in a year going ahead. I mean, I'm repeating this because I think this is worth a recap. So I think that so this year, the budget, the government says it missed its revenue generation targets by 27%, I'm guessing, is what you said. and is now
Yeah.
hopes to raise an extra 30% in a year when there's 2%
No,
growth.
it hopes to raise by 27%. It missed by
Oh,
30%.
30%. Sorry, the numbers were flipped, right? So एक ऐसे साल में जब आपके पास आप कह रहे हैं कि जी फैक्ट्रियां बंद हो रही हैं, लोगों की नौकरियां जा रही हैं, आपको गरीब का सोचना है, हम पेंडेमिक आप लॉकडाउन करें या ना करें, वैसे ही जनरली जो है ना स्लो डाउन है, ग्लोबल ट्रेड जो है वो हैज गॉन डाउन, सो आपकी एक्सपोर्ट वैसे भी गिरेगी, ऑर्डर्स कैंसिल हो रहे हैं, यू नो ऑल दोस थिंग्स, एंड आई थिंक अ लॉट ऑफ दोस थिंग्स वी हैव बीन हियरिंग इन द अदर एपिसोड्स with you when you've been speaking to people, right? So आई थिंक दैट इस सिचुएशन में गवर्नमेंट कह रही है कि हमारा आप घबराएं नहीं, हम गरीब फ्रेंडली बजट और पैसे खर्च करेंगे, पहले से भी ज्यादा खर्च करेंगे, इसलिए कि हम पहले से ज्यादा पैसे रेज करेंगे। आई मीन तो उस पॉइंट के ऊपर देन द क्वेश्चन बिकम्स उजैर कि आप कह रहे हैं एहसास बड़ा नहीं हो रहा। हमने देखा है कि जो प्रोविंसेस जो फेडरल गवर्नमेंट का की स्पेंडिंग है ऑन हेल्थ वो बढ़ी है, बट कोई मतलब लाइक थ्रू द रूफ नहीं बढ़ी, राइट? थ्रू लाइक एज इन लाइक यू नॉट अ वॉर फुटिंग पे आप कहीं पर नहीं लेकर गए अपनी पब्लिक हेल्थ स्पेंडिंग को, कि जो है आप मतलब आप देखें ना कि ओके दिस इज यूर टेकिंग इट सीरियसली, यूर कटिंग ऑफ ऑन अदर थिंग्स एंड यूर काइंड ऑफ डबलिंग डाउन ऑन पब्लिक हेल्थ एंड ऑन कोविड रिस्पॉन्स। वो हमें लाइक इट्स नॉट जंपिंग आउट ऑफ द पेज, इज इट?
नहीं, and I will also correct you, the government कहने को तो कह रही है कि हम गरीबों पे पैसा खर्च करेंगे और पैसा ज़्यादा खर्च करेंगे, लेकिन असल में अगर आप टेबल 1 ही बजट का उठा के देख लें तो जो टोटल एक्सपेंडिचर है वो तकरीबन 8 ट्रिलियन रुपीस था रिवाइज्ड 2019-20 का। बजट के अंदर उन्होंने उसको 7.2 ट्रिलियन पे ले आए, तकरीबन 900 अरब रुपए कम किया है एक्सपेंडिचर हुकूमत ने। तो ये बात समझ नहीं आ रही कि एक ऐसे साल में जब आपकी मईशत फॉर्मल और इनफॉर्मल रुक गई है, दुनिया भर में रुक गई है, और दुनिया भर के ममालिक बशमूल भारत, बशमूल बांग्लादेश स्टिम्युलस देने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, आपकी हुकूमत बड़े फख्र से कह रही है और बजट्स में दिखा रही है कि हम 900 अरब रुपए कम खर्च करेंगे इस साल।
तो फिर
उसका
अगर
बड़ा चंक एक मैं क्लियर कर दूं, उसका बड़ा चंक जो है वो जो डेट रीपेमेंट का जो डिफरल है उसकी वजह से हो रहा है। लेकिन अगर मैं एडवाइस दूं हुकूमत को कि अगर आप डेट डिफरमेंट की वजह से 900 अरब रुपए या कुछ पैसे बचा रहे हैं, तो उसको एक्सपेंडिचर कम करने की बजाय आपको इकोनॉमी में डालने चाहिए स्टिम्युलस देने के लिए। आप बड़े फख्र से कह रहे हैं कि हमने हुकूमती सैलरीज नहीं बढ़ाई, फॉर एग्जाम्पल कुछ लोग ये कहते हैं कि अच्छा हुआ नहीं बढ़ाई। मेरे नजदीक एक मिस्टेक है। क्यों? क्योंकि 2 साल से आपकी इन्फ्लेशन 8, 9, 10, 11% पे चल रही है, तो जो हुकूमत के जो काम करने वाले लोग हैं उनकी रियल सैलरीज हैव डिक्लाइंड इन द लास्ट फ्यू इयर्स। अब जब वो डिक्लाइन हुआ है, आपने उनकी सैलरी फ्रीज कर दी, हालांकि इन्फ्लेशन 11% थी पिछले साल, तो जो परचेसिंग पावर है वो 10% तकरीबन उनका कम हो गया। पाकिस्तान की इकोनॉमी 95% कंजम्पशन पे चलती है, जीडीपी, ठीक है? तो अब अगर आपने उस कंजम्पशन को वापस लाना है, तो वन ऑफ द टूल्स द गवर्नमेंट हैज इज टू गिव मोर मनी टू पीपल हु वर्क फॉर इट, एंड देन यू नो एंड आई नो दैट गवर्नमेंट सैलरी इंक्रीजेस आल्सो लीड टू प्राइवेट सेक्टर सैलरी इंक्रीजेस। तो अब आपने एक ऑस्टेरिटी लाके परचेसिंग स्पेंडिंग जो है मईशत में जो होनी चाहिए उस पे आपने ब्रेक लगा दिया खुद ही। तो और आप कह रहे हैं कि आप सेल्स टैक्स बढ़ाएंगे, तो आप सेल्स टैक्स कैसे बढ़ाएंगे जब लोग पैसे ही खर्च नहीं करेंगे?
नहीं करेंगे, बिल्कुल। एंड आई थिंक ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट डिस्टिंक्शन है। आज रात को हम एंड बाय द टाइम दिस गोज आउट पीपल माइट हैव ऑलरेडी सीन दिस, वी had a conversation with Shamoon Sultan, Tabadlab Live we had with Shamoon Sultan, who's the CEO and founder of Khadi, right? So the retail outlet and textile manufacturer. They used to be manufacturers, now they're retailers. And so one of the things that he said, where we asked him कि वो ईद वाला पीरियड जो था पोस्ट लॉकडाउन, तो उसमें क्या हुआ, लोग मतलब तुम लोगों को हिट कितना पड़ा, लोग किस तरह से आए, you know, like we spoke about, you know, things like e-commerce and, you know, retail का future. One of the things that he said was कि यार one of the things he said was कि yes, we took a hit. Ramzan period, pre-Eid is our most lucrative time. We were operating at smaller timings and smaller reduced timings with or like, you know, बहुत limited था, malls बनते and all that. that we lost about 50% of revenue, ठीक है? Because of reduced timings and वो सारी चीजें. And he felt, and of course that's his opinion, he felt that if they'd been allowed to open full time, they would have been able to get crowds in safer and spread it across, and it would have been better. But the 50% wala number is very interesting because abhi tak, despite there being a lockdown, despite there being a slowdown, हमने रमजान में देखा कि लोग निकले और they rushed to bazaars और उन्होंने retail पे हमने फिर भी activity देखी market के अंदर, right? But should there be a second lockdown, even without a second lockdown, that ability is going to start getting hit, right? So by the time we get to Bakr Eid, we get beyond Bakr Eid, we're going to start seeing कि लोगों की जेब के ऊपर फर्क पड़ रहा है और उनकी ability to spend. And मैं बड़ी specific startup की बात कर रहा हूँ, the one that we started the program with, उनको तो already I'm sure heavily because हो रहा होगा ना, because they have no savings, they have no revenue, multiple revenue streams, तो उनको तो अभी से फर्क पड़ रहा होगा. तो उसके केस में आपकी बात बिल्कुल ठीक है कि सेल्स टैक्स बढ़ा के आप किससे सेल्स टैक्स लेंगे, ठीक है ना? मतलब कि आप कौन गाड़ियां खरीद रहा होगा अगर आप ऑटोमोटिव के ऊपर जो है ना पैकेज बना दें, मगर पेंडेमिक के अंदर तो कौन गाड़ियां इस वक्त खरीद रहा होगा कि आप जो है उससे कमा लें, राइट? मतलब कि हम like we've seen the disaster that's been the oil crisis that we've seen in the country, कि उन्हें आपने prices slash हुई and then we've completely now are in a situation where we get to it. So, but Uzair, इस पूरी conversations में what I've said and what you said, बड़े थोड़ी सी ना we find that the government is kind of in between like a rock and a hard place, it seems, right? तो कि वो जो मसला ये है कि एक तो तरफ हम कह रहे हैं कि जी आपने जो है एहसास के ऊपर कम पैसे खर्च कर रहे हैं, ठीक है? दूसरी तरफ गवर्नमेंट के पास मसला ये है कि एक्टिविटी भी कम है, वो उसमें पैसे भी कम रेज कर सकते हैं. पहले उनके एम्बिशियस टारगेट्स हैं, मगर वो हमें पता है कि कभी मीट नहीं होंगे, और उन्होंने कर्जे की किस्तें भी देनी है, ठीक है? तो पैसे कहाँ से आए और कहाँ से लाएं, और स्पेशली आई मीन पेंडेमिक ना भी हो तब ये मसला है, मगर इवन इन अ रिसेशन मतलब what options does the federal government have?
देखिए, इसका एक एग्जांपल मैं आपको देता हूँ. This played out exactly this way in India 2 to 3 weeks ago. India, being a much stronger economy than Pakistan, went into a much stricter lockdown, and economists there are projecting GDP will decline by 8, 9, 10% in the coming year. Okay, that's how severe the lockdown was. The government there, despite not having a debt crisis like Pakistan does, has a legal crisis on its hand because it cannot have a fiscal deficit that, if I remember the figure correctly, 3.5% of GDP. 3.3, 3.5 के करीब उनको रहना जरूरी है by law. They can change the law, but the law is what it is for the time being. So when Nirmala Sitharaman, the finance minister, and the government came out with a series of stimulus programs, which by the way are huge in terms of quantum of dollar figures, they relied on giving out loans rather than direct stimulus or SaaS type spending. जो थोड़ी बहुत है उसके अंदर, but it wasn't as big as, and the reason was the fiscal deficit. Their thinking was कि अगर हम ज़्यादा खर्च करेंगे और हम सिग्नल करेंगे कि हम fiscal deficit से आगे चले जाएंगे जो हमारी लिमिट है, तो Moody's, Fitch, international bond investors वो कहेंगे कि India is losing its plot, it's spending too much and we're losing confidence, और उससे हमारे borrowing rates बढ़ जाएंगे और उसका financial stability पे negative impact होगा. That was broadly the logic of the government going in with the stimulus. What happened was कि उन्होंने जब ये सोच के stimulus बनाया, तो उसके बाद मूडीज फिच वगैरह ने इंडिया की ग्रोथ ही डाउनग्रेड कर दी, और उन्होंने कहा कि ग्रोथ आपकी कम होगी क्योंकि आपका स्टिमुलस इतना बड़ा नहीं है, उसकी वजह से आपका फिस्कल डेफिसिट तो वैसे ही बढ़ जाएगा, तो द गवर्नमेंट शुड डू मोर. सिमिलरली हियर इन पाकिस्तान यू आर फेस्ड विद द सिचुएशन जहां कंस्ट्रेंट्स हैं आपकी, लेकिन अगर आप उन कंस्ट्रेंट्स को मद्देनजर रखते हुए कहेंगे कि हम पैसे कम खर्च करेंगे क्योंकि हमारे पास कैपेसिटी नहीं है, तो जो मूडीज फिच वगैरह का जो एनालिस्ट बैठा है या बैठी है वो देखेगी, वो कहेगी कि यार इन्होंने 2% ग्रोथ प्रोजेक्ट की है, 30% रेवेन्यूज इंक्रीज की बात कर रहे हैं, वो तो हो ही नहीं सकता, तो ग्रोथ तो एक्चुअली और कम होगी, तो हम डाउनग्रेड कर रहे हैं पाकिस्तान को क्योंकि वो तो टारगेट्स मीट ही नहीं कर सकते. In essence, what you need at this point in time is a very comprehensive plan of reviving economic growth. Or us part of that plan is to stimulate the economy by increased spending. अब जब आप बजट लाते हैं और आप कहते हैं कि हम एक्चुअली बजट में एक्सपेंडिंग कम कर रहे हैं ओवरऑल, तो the market will look at it and say, wait a minute, the things may actually get worse. So they will hold back even more. So that's the risk here. And that's the risk that they're playing with, is that because you have to negotiate with the IMF, essentially this is why the budget is structured the way it is, that you're not spending money. But the longer you hold back on spending money, the more actually later on you will have to spend to revive the economy.
So essentially, there's another rock in a hard place. One is where you have to show the IMF कि हम अपनी current expenditure नीचे लेकर आ रहे हैं, हम cuts कर रहे हैं, हम तनख्वाहें नहीं बढ़ा रहे, हम pensions नहीं बढ़ा रहे, and all that. And then the other rock or hard place is कि आपकी global projection क्या है? Like so investment लाने के लिए, trade के लिए, आपकी economy की ranking के लिए जो है आपने क्या दिखाना है? And that is a balance that the government has to strike. So they have to fake it one way and kind of feint it the other, but not go in one direction too much. Or do you think that they've gone in one direction, leaned in one direction too much for in this particular budget?
I just view from a perspective of the budget and everything that's come out since the economic survey or the last few days, is that they're just short of ideas. And there is no creative thinking. And I don't like, in my analysis getting personal, but let's be honest, the people who are advising on the economy have advised other prime ministers on the economy for many years before this. And so I am not surprised that they're short on creative ideas and creative thinking on what to do here. The example I'll give you is, like, forget about COVID. There is a locust attack going on the agricultural sector in Pakistan, which employs a huge proportion of Pakistanis. Did you hear a single thing in the budget about dealing with this crisis in the agricultural sector? No. Your agricultural sector is growing at 2.9%, but there is no planning done to revive it, to restructure it, to get its yields going up, because I don't know why, right? And so there would have been creative ways to do things. Like, for example, the policy they came out with EVs in the last couple of days is really good, right? You need more measures like that to create the idea that the government will provide stimulus in a targeted manner, not in the construction package manner, in a targeted manner, like the EV manner. And it will make investments in next generation ideas, programs that will help leapfrog the economy forward. But we're just not seeing that. And so my fear with this budget is that it's an austerity-led budget. And by being austerity-led, you're actually going to more fundamentally reduce the growth in the economy, which will lead to other issues such as bank borrowing and cuts to PSDP and other programs.
So it's not very, I mean, I'm sure that a Pakistani episode doesn't have a lot to celebrate, unfortunately. I mean, I know. But अगर ये जो हम ज़्यादा doom and gloom पे ख़त्म नहीं करना चाहिए, तो मेरा सवाल ये होगा कि what are the opportunities in the year ahead that you feel? Because you speak to so many people, there's a lot of amazing things that are happening in Pakistan, but the COVID situation is the way it is. It is for us, it is for, like you said, for our neighbors, and it is globally. तो क्या है ये, इसमें से क्या निकाल सकते हैं हम, इस out of this कचरे के ढेर में से कुछ हम शाइनिंग निकाल सकते हैं?
I mean, look, the one thing that I've discussed, this is what I've done 20 plus episodes talking to people across sectors. One thing that comes out always is that the solutions to Pakistan are known, to Pakistan's problems are known. A lot of research has been done on how to help formalize the informal economy, which was the last episode we did. A lot of proposals have been made to help startups grow faster and bring in investment for startups faster. Some conversations I've had with people is around GST, for example, right? Like, so I've written about the fact that one of the things I was hopeful for was that, like the EV policy, the government would say, okay, we know people don't want to spend right now. It's a pandemic, incomes are squeezed, but we want you to spend. So one way of encouraging that is to say, your GST will be reduced. I propose 0, but whatever that figure might be compared to what it is, if you transact digitally. Why is that important? Because it's an incentive for people to formalize. आप डंडे के जोर पे शब्बर जैदी ने तो कोशिश की ना मशीनें लगाने की, नहीं लगी ना मशीन. शबरदस्ती सब चले गए ना एंड में. आपने लोगों को इंसेंटिव देना है ताकि कल को मैं दुकान पे जाऊं या आप जाएं या कोई और जाए और वो कहे कि यार ये 100 रुपए की चीज है, वो बंदा कहे कैश पे दो, तो आप कस्टमर होके कहें कि नहीं मैं तो तुम्हें जैस कैश से दे रहा हूँ या किसी और तरीके से डिजिटल पेमेंट्स के थ्रू दे रहा हूँ क्योंकि मेरी बचत है उसके अंदर. And you build the incentive to formalize the economy while encouraging people to spend. That's, you need creative thinking, creative ideas. Similarly, you need, for the agricultural sector, there's a lot of investment that needs to happen in farm to market roads, supply chain, things like that, that the government can spend money on, and the international community will look at it and say, yes, we don't like that you're spending, but you're spending on the right sort of thing, so we'll take it right now, right? And then for the final point here is that when you do that, like the Nawaz Sharif era, the Federal Reserve, for example, in the US is signaling 0% interest rates for the next 2 years at least, right? Uski wajah se there will be a reach for yield in global bond markets, which is that they can give money to the US Treasury or to the Bank of England or to the British government and get basically no return on their yield or very slim return. Or they can give it to emerging market bonds where they can get 4, 5%, 6% on dollar returns. That reach for yield, and Pakistan will need debt, right? That's just the reality. We need debt to finance our investments. If you do the right reforms, the bond market will look at you and say, wait a minute, I can look at Vietnam, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Nigeria, Malaysia, others, and I have confidence that Pakistan is making the right moves, the right reforms, the right investments for its economy coming out of this crisis. So let me offer a better yield to their debt, right? And so that's why I continue to say, and people continue to argue that if you have a good roadmap of reforms that you're standing by and executing, it will be painful politically. For example, steel mills, a lot of people were arguing that असद उमर की पुरानी वीडियोस चल रही थी और इमरान खान की पुरानी वीडियोस चल रही थी कि क्या हुआ, आप तो खड़े होने वाले थे इनके साथ और ये वो, अब आप प्राइवेटाइज करने की जरूरत है. उस इंस्टीट्यूशन को हुकूमत क्यों दे रही है अरबों रुपए हर साल, राइट? तो आपने एक रोड मैप देना है कि जी हम इस तरह इकोनॉमी को रिवाइव करेंगे, which is what I was expecting from this budget and which sadly did not come through.
So just to wrap up, before we wrap up, so basically the government is, we're right now mishmash hai. Intentions की clarity जो है usually आ जाती है budget के अंदर से, मगर mixed messages हैं. बहुत सारे वादे हैं जो पुराने, जो हमें नजर नहीं आ रहे बजट के इन शीट्स में. बहुत सारी चीजें हैं जो सरप्राइजेस हैं, बहुत सारी चीजों की उम्मीद थी वो हमें नहीं नजर आ रही. कुछ सरप्राइजेस हैं जो कि आई मीन वाइल कुछ सरप्राइजेस नहीं भी हैं, जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल pensions is still a growing number. So federal pensions, which includes military and non-military federal spending, continues to grow. Will soon kind of become one of the largest heads, debt servicing heads in the federal budget. So that stays the same. तो आपकी रेवेन्यू जितनी भी श्रिंक कर जाए, आपने एहसास के तो पैसे काट सकते हैं आप, मगर ये तो आपकी गवर्नमेंट की कमिटमेंट है, वो उसने पूरी करनी है. तो वो उसने जो है ना पेंशन और तनख्वाहें जो हैं वो देनी है. You feel that that's a good thing in the pandemic because it kind of stimulates activity in the economy, so that's a good thing. But long term, in terms of the government's ability to be flexible and move money around, there are opinions that kind of feel that the government is kind of cutting its own wings by loaded taxes and will. Sorry.
There definitely is a pensions crisis, right? It is a crisis. It has to be dealt with, both at the federal and the provincial level. And that's just something that you need reforms on, no doubt about it. Similar to the SOE reform, similar to the power sector reform, आपकी contingent liabilities जो हैं वो 1.8 trillion rupees से ज़्यादा हो गई है इस वक्त, right? तो आपने reforms तो वो करने हैं. सवाल ये है कि आपका रोड मैप है क्या reforms करने का, and I think that's where there are things that are lacking in terms of a vision. Another thing we didn't touch upon, which I think they did a good move, is started to rationalize the tariff lines on the custom duties, which they've done in this budget, which is a good step. So you have some small things that are worth applauding. Withholding taxes जो inefficient थे उनको थोड़ा खत्म किया है. But overall एक macro economic plan जो पीटीआई बड़े शौक से कहती थी, असद उमर साहब बड़े शौक से कहते थे कि हमने प्लानिंग की हुई है, तो ये इनका दूसरा बजट है. मिनी बजट्स अगर आप ऐड कर दें तो चौथा पांचवा बजट है. तो वो प्लान नजर नहीं आ रहा कि करना क्या चाहते हैं. इट्स जस्ट बेसिकली reacting to each crisis that comes their way and figuring out as the crisis unfolds what we need to do to get to the basically the next crisis. Pensions are a similar thing, and this is not just a PTI thing. ये हर हुकूमत ने किया है जब से मैं एटलीस्ट देख रहा हूँ. बाल गिर गए, लेकिन क्राइसिस को रिफॉर्म करने की जो है वो solution नहीं आई अभी तक, और pensions are a part of that, and again your contingent liabilities are a part of that as well.
I think it's very important for me to just to put this disclaimer out there before we wrap के बाल गिरे नहीं हैं वो कोविड के दौरान जो है वो हम सबकी जो barbering skills हैं वो थोड़ी सी unlock हुई हैं. So yeah, look, one of the things that I heard years ago, and I think that continues to be true for every government and every finance minister, is that पाकिस्तान को अपने रिफॉर्म एजेंडा को अचीव करने के लिए और अपने इकोनॉमी को सही से एक ट्रैक पे और एक रेजिलिएंट तरीके से मूव कराने के लिए, you need brain surgeons and you need surgical precision to move things around, and you need that kind of, and what we see with every budget is some very fancy carpentry but not enough surgery. And so I think that this budget is just an example of the same. We keep kind of maneuvering ourselves into corners, and then the following budget or 2 years later, we're working towards getting ourselves out of that corner. So I think this budget continues to be the same.
I agree. And I think I said it in the last podcast with Dr. Ali Kamal on the informal economy. We were talking about what do we need as the overall solution, right? And there has to be a mindset shift, not just in the government, just across society in Pakistan and its policymakers, is that you need to shift away from a tax-led approach to a growth-led approach. The problem, yes, is that your tax to GDP ratio is low by peer economy standards. You need to broaden the tax base. But at this point in time, an economy like Pakistan, one of the largest, most populous countries in the world, cannot grow at 2% a year. It cannot afford to grow when its population is growing at 2.5%, 3% a year. When you look at census data, it should not be growing at that population growth rate, right? So yes, there are problems where your defense spending, for example, every few years continues to take up a bigger chunk of your spending at the federal level. Your debt servicing now is taking up more and more chunks of money. But those problems will only be solved by reform that lead to growth in the long term or in the medium term. You cannot continue to have 4% growth, 4.5% growth, and then back to the IMF, because that is the problem. अगर आप sustained grow कर सकते हैं 5% पर, तो ये सारे problems आहिस्ता आहिस्ता fiscally भी solve होने लग जाएंगे, even if you don't do a lot of reforms to them, because the growth will outpace everything else. लेकिन हमारा problem पिछले चंद सालों में ये हो गया है कि आपने ग्रोथ को इतना हैम्पर कर दिया है कि अब आप एक मोमेंट पर आ गए कि ना आप टैक्स इंक्रीज कर सकते हैं, ना कोई और रिसोर्स जनरेट कर सकते हैं. तो सिर्फ एक ही चीज रह गई है, आप कर्जे ले रहे हैं, या कभी कर्जे बाहर से लेते हैं, कभी कर्जे अपनी बैंक से लेते हैं. और पीटीआई का भी यही हाल है. हालांकि मेरा मानना है कर्जे लेना कोई बुरी बात नहीं है. वजीर आजम इमरान खान ये बहुत कहते थे कि कर्जे ले लेके मुल्क को डुबा दिया है. उन कर्जों के साथ आप करते क्या हैं? That is the question.
On that note, thank you very much, Uzair. And role reversal जो है वो थोड़ा सा आपका temporary है. So I hope things went. You liked being on the other end where you get to speak more and share your opinions.
No, it was good. Thank you for moderating. And yes, next week we will resume to regular service and have a good rest of the day.
Yeah. So thank you very much. That's it for this episode on the budget. Wherever you're listening, please subscribe. We're available on all podcast apps. Please like us on YouTube and on Facebook, and hope you continue to watch Pakistanomy. Khudafis.